Hey, welcome back to the pod. Today I have my guest, Ben Guttmann. Ben is the author of Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. Ben is a marketing and communications expert. He's an executive and educator on a mission to get leaders to more effectively connect by simplifying their message. Ben is the former co-founder at Digital Natives Group, an award-winning agency that worked with the NFL, I Love New York, Comcast NBCUniversal, and other major clients. Currently, Ben teaches digital marketing at Baruch College in New York City and consults with a range of thought leaders, startups, and other brands. And he's on a mission to get leaders to connect more effectively by embracing simplicity. Ben, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, Raul. It's great to be here.
So many different angles that we can dive into, from marketing, client services. But I think the key thing that I want to focus on is around simplicity and clarity and communication. I think that communication, the older I get, can't see the gray. Sure, there is a lot of it. There's a couple, but the older I get, the more I see the number one skill set for us to achieve nearly anything is communication with self, communication with others, building relationship, and that includes diving into sales and marketing and the whole gamut. So I'm curious to learn more about, why did you care enough about clarity and simplicity to write a whole book about it?
Well, this same reason you feel that it's something important, right? Where the older you get, the more experience you have in terms of being somebody who works in the world, being somebody who is a consumer of the world, the more you start to appreciate that simplicity and clarity is not only important in and of itself, but is also often a symbol of, or a signal for, a lot of other good things, right? It's a signal for somebody being more confident, more intelligent, somebody being more reliable, more competent, and all of those things are what we want, right? So that certainly has resonated with me as well. But I mean, my background is I ran a marketing agency for 10 years. I sold that about a year ago, almost 2 years ago. And what do you hire a marketing agency for? Well, it's that I have something I want to tell the world and I need help doing it. And so how we do that is in the trenches all the time, and you're working on it, doing whatever advertising or other campaign you're working on. But then when you sell the business, your brain still keeps going in that regard. And the question that we were solving all the time, it's kind of the same question, and it still would linger in my head, which is, why do some messages work when others don't? Why do some campaigns deliver on their goals? Why do some emails and proposals sell a bunch of business? Why do some warnings? Why do some political slogans? Why do these things work and others kind of fall flat? And it turns out that the answer is, to go back to what we were talking about, is simplicity. The simpler messages were more effective than the ones that were more complicated. And I started digging into it, right? So I when you don't have to do the work all the time for the agency, it lets you kind of do some of the exploration of these different ideas. And one of them, as I'm looking into this, is I start to realize, okay, well, the secret behind simplicity is this other word, which we know, which is fluency. So you can be fluent in English or Spanish or Mandarin. You can be fluent in cooking or in Star Trek or whatever you're interested in. But if you ask a cognitive scientist what they mean by it, they basically would say, well, it's how easy is it for you to take something from out in the world, stick it into your head, and make sense of it, right? The things that are easier to do that are more fluent or simpler. And that is correlated with, you're more likely to trust them, to like them, to buy them, all the things that you want, right? All the things in a campaign that you want, or in any sort of piece of communication. And the opposite is also true, which is that when things are more complicated, when they're difficult, when it takes extra sweat, well, we don't like them, we don't trust them, we don't buy them. And so that's what I began to learn as I was investigating this, is that the real thing is that when we're receiving communication, we want something fluent, but then it's really hard for us to get there oftentimes.
It's pretty interesting, not to get on philosophy, but it's interesting because when we absorb or understand the world, we first have to reason to it. And what you're saying is, make the thinking energy of the listener or the viewer or the reader lower threshold, still get the message across, make it easy to understand, even go to what I would say, not just thinking, but to an emotional impact when you're making the
Mhm.
message. Is that like part of simplicity as well?
Oh, that's certainly part of it, right? So it's how easy does it fit into our minds, right? Imagine kind of the metaphorical like gate to our minds. We encounter so many things on a daily basis, like millions of bits of information every second that we process. And we only attend to a small fraction of that. And so we're distracted. There's lots of things that are out there that are calling and buzzing and beeping for our attention. And to be honest, your new ad for a shampoo is not one of the things that we want to wake up and we attend to in our daily basis. But the easier, the simpler the message is, it's almost like the oil on the hinge to your mind it's easier to open it. And when it's easier to open, you're more likely to do it. It's simpler. It doesn't take as much kind of a yank to shove that thing into your head. And so if you're able to do that, you're able to meet somebody where they are in terms of their emotions, their motivations, their needs. And that's going to always be more effective than not.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's meeting them where they're at, and then from them, the viewer, the listener, to have the will to want to take action now. So let's talk about the 5 attributes. So you have 5 specific attributes of simple messages. Messages have to be beneficial, focused, salient, empathetic, and minimal. Let's dive into each and just give us maybe not just a definition, but like a working definition of how can we really contextualize this and chew on this to really create something.
Exactly. So you mentioned these principles. These are design tools. So my background's in design. These are design tools that allow us to kind of bridge this gap. Because I mentioned before, we want things as a receiver to be fluent. However, when we are a sender, when we're that advertiser or that leader or that advocate, whatever, well, we're often pulled in the other direction. Because internally, we deal with things such as an additive bias, where we're more likely to add than we are to subtract when we're trying to create or communicate. And externally, we're faced with all these other pressures from the people, the structures around us to complicate. There's incentives for that, and there's not so many incentives for simplifying. So that's the gap that we have. And these principles are about how do we bridge that gap. It's not a checklist or a rubric or a schedule, but it's how do we look at these ideas as something that will help us get across. So the first one you mentioned is beneficial, which is what does it matter to the receiver? What's in it for them? Kind of a features versus benefits piece here. The second one is focused. Are you trying to say one thing or multiple things at once? Is it one idea or is it kind of 3 ideas in a trench coat? And the third is salient. Does your message stand out from the noise? Is it noticeable? Does it rise to your attention? Is there contrast? The fourth is empathetic, which is, are you speaking in a language that the audience understands, both in terms of their literal language, but also, again, their emotions, their motivations, where they are. And then finally, it's minimal, which is have you cut out everything you need that isn't important and only kept what is. Everything you need, but only what you need. And so the better you can activate on these, the better positioned you're going to be a strong communicator in whatever role you're trying to do.
So what's in it for me? Focus on one thing, be different, speak my language. And the last one, I think this is the hardest one. Say only what you need. Because sometimes if I talk to business owners or entrepreneurs, even myself, like when I do my own positioning, oh my God, it's harder than it looks. We want to ramble and talk on and just have run-on sentences without being very concise. And so how this is not just copy editing, but how do we really trunk down to say what's necessary? How do you know you've said what you need versus saying everything you want?
And so there's a reason this one's at the end. And so I lied a little bit by saying it's not step by step. Is because unless you look at these other principles first, it's hard to identify that, right? It's hard to say, well, what exactly do I need and what I don't need? If you have these little bits of friction, and by the way, this is what we're talking about when we talk about minimal. I mentioned design before. If you ask a user experience designer about the word friction, this is what they work in all the time. You put friction between things before things that you don't want to happen, and you remove friction for things that you want to incentivize. If you've ever tried to cancel your subscription somewhere, well, that's a lot of friction, right? There's a pop-up and there's a phone number you got to call and you got to send this document, all these different steps that are keeping you from doing it. But if you want to give somebody money in terms of a donation or a purchase, well, it's remarkably easy, right? All of a sudden, all the steps get a lot simpler. There's no more distractions. So that's what we're looking at when we're talking about minimal. It doesn't mean the fewest number of words. It doesn't mean the fewest number of sentences or paragraphs or pages. It means the least amount of friction. How easy is it for somebody to get where you want them to go? because
Hmm.
every point of friction, every point of bullshit, basically, is something that it's an off ramp, right? It's an
Yeah.
opportunity for somebody to say, hey, you know what? I don't know what you mean by that word. This is too long. I'm not paying attention. I'm going to go pay attention to something else. The average American spends 13 hours a day consuming some form of media. It's a
Wow.
ton of time, right? So many things are competing for our attention. And if you make it a little bit hard for somebody to understand what you're saying, well, they're just gone. And
Hmm.
that's obviously not what we want.
So I like that. Friction, obviously BS, but it's not to truncate it to make it less than 50 characters or less. More about how can I have this idea that exists in my mind also exist in the same format, tone, and like benefit statements in your mind. How do you know when you achieve that?
Well, I mean, it's all testing, right? So
Yeah.
that's actually when I talk about empathy, I talk a lot about testing, which is how do you get out of your own bubble and talk to your audience? This is the most no duh piece of this entire framework is
Mhm.
that talk to your audience, test it on them. Does it work? Does it not work? Does it resonate? Are they going to do the thing you want? And people don't do this for two reasons. Number one is it's kind of awkward. And they're like,
Mm.
I got to go talk to somebody. I don't know. I got to go flag them down on the street corner or give somebody a cold call. That's kind of weird. People don't like to do that. There are professionals that do that. There's marketing research firms, but the average person is pretty opposed instinctively to doing that. But here's the secret though. Once you do it a few times, it gets a lot easier. And the second reason, the bigger one, is that we're afraid that the feedback we get is going to be negative. And then all of
Mm.
a sudden, well, what are we working on here? This is a waste of time and money and effort. And so we're hesitant to go out and get feedback because we're afraid the feedback might be negative. But if you don't do the feedback, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. You're taking a gamble of something instead of doing the design work of creating something that's effective.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Well, walk us into your dojo. Let's go in and actually practice this in real life. What are some tactics or some tools or some things that we can do to really massage, not just massage, just let's forget massaging, to slap our messaging around and make sure that we're able to really form it in a way that others can receive it? What are some of the things that we can do?
So I'll go back to that first one there, beneficial, which is features versus benefits. If you've ever worked in sales, ever worked in marketing, you've probably heard people don't buy features, they buy benefits, right? We don't buy the thing, we want the thing does for us. There's a great way of saying this that I tell my students every semester. And I tell them, if you forget everything else I ever tell you, if you forget everything else from this degree, if you remember this, you're going to be ahead of most other people when it
Mm.
comes to business marketing. And this is not mine. I can't take credit. It's Theodore Levitt from Harvard in the 60s. He came up with it. It was people don't want a quarter-inch drill. They want a quarter-inch hole.
Mm.
People don't want a quarter-inch drill. They want a quarter-inch hole. They don't want the thing. They want what the thing does for them. They want the result of the thing. And I would also argue that it doesn't stop there. I don't even want the quarter-inch hole. I want my family photo on the wall.
Yeah.
And I actually don't even want the family photo on the wall. I want the feeling of love and belonging that I get when I walk down the hallway and I see them. And so, how do you get from the features to the benefits
Yeah.
and ultimately the needs? Well, it's a very simple tool. It's the question, so what? So what? So let's interrogate it with something else. We'll talk about
Mm.
toothpaste for a second. So mint flavor on a toothpaste. That's a feature. Features are things with your five senses, right? You can see, touch, smell, taste, feel the feature. And so mint flavor, that exists in the real world. This toothpaste has mint flavor. So what? Well, that means I'm going to have fresh breath. Okay, well, that's the first level benefit. Level one, we'll call it functional benefits, is that, okay, we're getting somewhere a little bit, but that's actually not even the goal, right? So I'm going to have fresh breath. And I interrogate, so what? Well, I have fresh breath. Because I want to have fresh breath because I want to be more successful on my date tonight. So all of a sudden,
Mm.
we got from mint flavor to fresh breath to the date tonight. And we'll call that the emotional benefit. But you can even go one more level and you could say, well, so what? So what? Why do you want to have that successful date? Well, it's because you might want to meet your love and belonging needs or your physiological needs or whatever other kind of those like foundational Maslow needs you've probably seen in a textbook somewhere.
Mhm.
How do you ladder up to those ones? And so by asking so what three times, you put yourself in a position where you go from the very tangible feature that's out in the world to something that is far less tangible, but is far more meaningful for your audience, which is their motivation. And then this helps us structure our communication in a way where, okay, well, now we understand our motivations. So we understand kind of the direction we want to go in. And then after that, we can say, well, the emotional benefit might be the hook. Maybe that's the headline on your page, the subject line of your email, first slide in your deck, whatever it is. That might be tied to the emotional benefit. And then the functional benefits, the second piece, the second headline, the follow-up text. And then eventually you get to the features because that's important. Still, you have to include it somewhere. By organizing it that way, by structuring our communication and investing accordingly in the different levels of it, we're going to be able to translate features into action in a way that we wouldn't if we just immediately said, hey, buy this toothpaste because it's the best mint flavor. That's not why we buy toothpaste.
Exactly. No, I'm taking notes because the two things that we can ever change through communication are our feelings about something and or our behavior. That's it. But really, feelings drive behavior, how you view something. Like if you view someone with $20 pair of glasses to up to $500 pair of glasses, what's the difference? It's the same thing, same plastic, different logo, different brand, different feeling. I like how you structured the emotion to be the headline and the feature be the subheadline. It's even further than just emotion. It's a practical, real life outcome that's hinged to an emotion. It's associated to an emotion that drives that. So the so what principle. What else can we dive into to kind of work our messaging?
That's good. And I'll give you, I'm glad you said that. That was all great stuff. I'll give you one other little kind of tool that features in here a little bit. The best communicators, they speak to one person because here's the thing, crowds don't exist. You could be in a crowd, but a crowd isn't really a thing. There are mob mentalities, those type of things. But for the most part, even if I'm talking to 10 people in a room somewhere, or if I'm talking to 1 million people via an advertisement on TV, well, it's still ultimately at the point of sale, effectively, it's 1-to-1, right? It's one voice to one person inside their head hearing that and making the decisions and the judgments based off of that message. So because a crowd doesn't really exist, when you address your messaging, when you put your mindset in the position of, well, I'm just talking to one person, you're going to be much more effective in how you communicate, both kind of explicitly and sometimes in the words that you choose, but it's also going to change the subtext of how you're messaging to people. If you ever want to see who's the best in the world at this right now, it's Taylor Swift. So I like her. I'm not a huge fan. My wife's a big fan. And we saw the movie, and you go and through the magic of space and time, this one woman on stage is able to make 70,000 people in the audience feel like they're the only person that she's talking to, both with her lyrics and with the kind of banter on stage. Mm-hmm. And then that's not just happening in that stadium. It's happening, again, through space and time, throughout the 1,000 movie theater screens with millions of people months later. Still feels like she's just having that one-to-one conversation. So that's kind of the extreme, apex example of it. But a lot of us can get better by, you could do stuff like marketing personas and whatnot, or you can take a little Post-it note and draw a stick figure on it and slap it to the side of your screen. And when you're writing a marketing email, be like, I'm writing to this guy, right? And that will put you in a headspace that will immediately make your communication more effective.
That's pretty critical. I didn't see your Swiftie tattoo, but that's a perfect example too. Why is it such a huge emotional drive? What's changing? What's that pivotal point? This is like an oxymoron to want to keep on going, even though we're supposed to be about simplicity. I still believe when it comes to if you have multiple products or services and you're trying to speak to that one person, where do you find commonality to address that one thing to that one person? Let's say it's a consultant to multiple people, or if it's one e-commerce store with multiple product lines and SKUs, how do you differentiate? Is it a message per product line? Is it at the brand level? Is it at the, I don't know, the niche level? How do you think about that when you're applying this principle?
I think that's one of those things that's entirely kind of case dependent upon what you're doing. That being said, the important thing is that I mentioned focus before, you do say one thing at a time, because if you try to message multiple things kind of in the same breath, in the same ad, if you say, hey, we are the lowest prices and the best location, and we have the friendliest salespeople, and we also have the longest history of community service. Well, you're telling me a lot of different things, and I'm not going to remember all of them because that's just not how we work. Focus on one thing at a time. And you can, if you are lucky enough to be kind of invited into somebody's attention, then you can begin to sequentially message other things. But multitasking is a myth. Attention in some ways is zero sum, where every time if you're focusing on one thing, you're going to get 100% of the possible attention that's devoted to you. If you're saying those 4 different things or 5 different things, well, all of a sudden that attention is going to be fragmented, and it's going to be less chance of you reaching that kind of critical mass of somebody being driven to action.
Do you believe through your research that attention spans are shortening? Because there's 2 sides of that coin, but I'm curious to know what your research tells you.
So it's one of those things that's not particularly like novel or insightful to say that we're so busy and distracted. I mean, everybody says that, right? Yeah. It is like it's been documented in many different ways that, hey, trends move faster than before, and we have more fragmented attention spans, and that is true. However, I also like to look at the historical lens for this, which is we've been saying for like thousands of years that, oh, kids these days, they have no attention and this and that. And if you can look back, you can find quotes from like a millennia ago of people saying, well, there's too many books. We're too distracted because of all these books, and our attention spans are getting fried because of it. So I try to temper it a little bit. Is that we do live in a unique historical moment. However, these problems are not 100% new. We've been dealing with information overload in different capacities throughout time. I think that if you look at the trends, if you look at, well, kind of the second degrees removed, and you say, well, okay, people are installing meditation apps at a rate that's grown exponentially in the past 5 or 6 years. People are installing ad blockers at a rate that is also growing at a similar clip. Both Google, Apple, and Mozilla and Microsoft, they're all introducing software that allows you to limit the amount of time you spend on a screen. While some stuff historically is true that, yes, we've been dealing with a similar problem for a long time, we also haven't had this level of like data and optimization and capitalist incentives that is all about kind of slicing and dicing that attention. So it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
I agree with you. And I think one other key thing is that humans, we like to think we're super evolved in 2023 or like super ahead of the curve. I don't think we've changed that much from like the Roman Empire until now. Like in terms of function, form, maybe lifespan and some health, but so that's pretty interesting. I think to kind of piggyback on what you mentioned, it's not that there's less distractions, it's that your messaging is boring or it doesn't work. So I think that's key.
Yeah, I mean, we're operating at the same hardware that we've had for 250,000 years, right? So it's been, we're built for a world where a lot of things want to eat us, and we're running around trying to avoid that fate. And that's how our attention modes work, right? We see a leaf kind of rustling somewhere, we quickly process it. Is it worth our attention? If it's not, then it gets disposed of, right? However, in modern practices have been designed to take advantage of some of this like physiological programming in a way that is different than it has been before. So it's a similar problem, but I think at a different scale than it's been in the past.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We're definitely experiencing different things. Well, Ben, thank you for being on. For our audience out here, where's the best place for people to, 1, thank you for being on, and 2, learn a little bit more what you're up to, maybe learn about the book?
Sweet. I mean, this has been awesome to be on the show. I've had a great conversation here. If you want to learn more, go check me out. Go to benguttmann.com. There's 2 T's and 2 N's in that. So it's not minimal. You have to put both of them in. If you go there, you can sign up for my newsletter. You can download a free chapter of the book if you want to get started, or just reach out, send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn, and would love to hear if this is something that's been relevant to you, or if there's something else I can do to help for speaking and consulting, whatever. And I appreciate you having me on and look forward to being in touch soon.
Cool, man. We'll put those links in the notes. Ben, we'll go from here. If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.